Welcome to Dear Fans. Karoline Leavitt stepped onto the sidewalk, her heels clicking against the pavement as the late afternoon sun dipped toward the horizon. Main Street hummed, with quiet activity, mothers guiding their children home from school, an old couple strolling past the bakery, a teenager balancing an iced coffee, and a phone in one hand. Across the street, the American flag outside the post office fluttered in the breeze. The town looked peaceful, normal, but something wasn't right. Near the entrance of the First Capital Bank, an old man sat hunched on a bench, his shoulders curled inward as if bracing against an invisible weight. A wooden cane rested beside him, his fingers gripping the handle so tightly his knuckles had turned white. His lap was covered in scattered paper, bank statements, a social security letter, a prescription slip. Some had fallen to the ground, fluttering slightly against the concrete. He stared at them, unmoving. The bank's glass doors had just closed behind him, their reflection catching the last rays of sunlight through them. A security guard stood near the entrance, arms crossed, watching the old man with the detached indifference of someone who had already decided their job was done. Inside, a bank teller turned away, busying herself with something behind the counter. A manager, a woman in a sharp blazer, walked briskly toward her office, her gaze fixed anywhere but outside. The street moved around the man, but he remained still. A young mother glanced at him as she passed, then quickly turned her child's face away. A businessman in a press suit hesitated, as if considering stopping, then adjusted his tie and kept walking. A teenage boy on a bike slowed as he rode past. "Mister, you okay?" The old man didn't look up. "They won't give me my money," he murmured, voice barely audible. The words lingered, fragile and defeated. The boy shifted uncomfortably, then rode away. Karoline watched from across the street, her grip tightening around the left strap of her purse. Something about the scene, the way the old man's fingers trembled, the way his papers lay discarded at his feet like broken promises, made her stomach turn. She stepped off the curb. She crossed the street with purpose, her steps steady, her eyes locked on the old man. As she approached, she noticed the deep lines carved into his face, not just from age, but from something heavier, a lifetime of burdens, sacrifices. His hands, calloused and veined, told their own story. He didn't look up as she neared his shoulders, remained slumped, his breath shallow. The papers on his lap fluttered slightly in the evening breeze. Karoline bent down, picking up a folded letter. Near his feet, the words, U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, were stamped in bold at the top. She held it out to him. "Sir," she said softly, "is this yours?" His fingers moved sluggishly as he took it, as if even this small act of receiving was too much. He swallowed hard. "Thank you," he muttered. Karoline glanced toward the bank. The security guard at the door shifted his weight, but didn't stop her. Inside, behind the polished glass, bank employees moved with quiet efficiency, oblivious to the man they had just cast out. The manager in the sharp blazer had disappeared from sight. She turned back to him. "What happened?" For a moment, he didn't answer. Then his grip tightened around the cane. His voice, when it came, was hoarse, strained. "They won't give me my money," he repeated. "Been coming here for 40 years, never had a problem. Today, they say I need something called digital verification." His throat worked as he swallowed again. "I don't have a smartphone, never needed one before." Karoline exhaled slowly. The injustice of it hit her all at once. A veteran, a man who had served his country, who had worked, saved, and done everything right, now treated like he didn't exist because he couldn't navigate a system designed for people decades younger. The weight in her chest grew heavier. She straightened. "Wait here." Then she turned and walked toward the bank. Karoline didn't hesitate as she pushed open the glass doors. The cool air inside was a stark contrast to the warmth of the evening sun outside. The murmur of quiet conversations, the rhythmic tapping of keyboards, and the faint hum of the air conditioning filled the space. A few customers glanced up as she entered, but most remained absorbed in their transactions. The security guard near the entrance straightened slightly, his posture shifting from casual indifference to mild concern. He recognized her now. She could see it in the flicker of hesitation in his eyes. Karoline Leavitt wasn't just another customer. She scanned the room, her gaze landing on the teller, who had dismissed the old man. The woman was young, early 20s at most, her blonde hair pulled into a tight ponytail. She was typing something on her computer, eyes locked on the screen as if willing herself not to look up. Karoline stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp but controlled. The teller flinched, then slowly looked up. "Can I help you?" "You just turned away a veteran outside," Karoline said, tilting her head toward the glass doors. "He's been banking here for over 40 years, and now, suddenly, he can't access his money because he doesn't own a smartphone." The teller's cheeks flushed. "Ma'am, Karoline didn't wait for the excuse. She turned her gaze to the far end of the room where a woman in a fitted navy blazer, stood by the office's flipping through a stack of documents. The nameplate on the nearest desk read Rebecca Stevens, branch manager. Without another word, Caroline strode across the floor, her heels clicking against the polished tiles. Rebecca looked up. Just as Caroline reached her, there was a moment of silent recognition. "Miss Leavitt," Rebecca said, her professional mask snapping into place. "I wasn't expecting." Caroline cut her off. "I need to talk to you now." Rebecca hesitated, glancing around as if calculating how much attention this conversation might draw. The bank wasn't packed, but enough people were watching. Now phones were being lifted, screens were recording. The weight of public scrutiny pressed into the room like an approaching storm. Rebecca forced a polite smile. "Of course, my office." Caroline nodded. Once inside the office, the glass walls did little to provide privacy. Customers still watched. The security guard remained by the entrance, shifting nervously. Rebecca sat behind her desk, neatly arranging the papers in front of her as if organizing them would somehow prepare her for this conversation. "I assume this is about the gentleman outside." Caroline took a seat across from her, leaning forward. "You assume correctly." Rebecca folded her hands. "Miss Leavitt, I understand your concern, but this is a matter of security protocols. We've updated our verification process. As per federal guidelines, all customers must be digitally verified to prevent fraud, especially among elderly populations." Caroline's jaw tightened. "You think forcing a 70-year-old veteran to download an app he doesn't understand is protecting him?" Rebecca sighed, her carefully controlled demeanor faltering. "For the first time, the system isn't perfect, but these policies exist for a reason. Without digital verification, we can't access his account." "My hands are tied." Caroline sat back, exhaling slowly. "Let me ask you something, Rebecca." She tapped a finger against the desk. "Do you know who that man is?" Rebecca blinked. He's a veteran." Caroline continued. "A man who served this country, who worked, saved, and trusted this bank for over 4 decades. And today you had security escort him out like a criminal because he doesn't own a smartphone." Rebecca's fingers twitched slightly. She didn't respond. Caroline pressed on. "I get it, you have policies, rules, but tell me, where in that rule book does it say you should humiliate a man who's done nothing wrong?" Silence stretched between them. Caroline could see the conflict flicker across Rebecca's face. It was the look of someone caught between protocol and conscience, between what was expected and what was right. The clock on the wall ticked closer to 5. "He needs his money," Caroline said, her voice softer now. "His wife is sick. He doesn't have time for paperwork and digital verification. He needs it now." Rebecca's fingers curled into fists. The weight of the moment settled heavily between them. Finally, Rebecca exhaled. She reached for her keyboard, fingers hesitating for only a second before she began typing. "Emergency override protocol." She murmured a few keystrokes later. A receipt printed from the small machine beside her desk. Rebecca tore it off, stood, and walked to the door. When she stepped back into the lobby, the hush was palpable. Customers watched, the security guard tensed, the tellers held their breath. Rebecca crossed the floor, pushed open the glass door, and stepped outside. The old man was still on the bench, his papers clutched to his chest like a lifeline. His eyes flicked up as she approached. She held out the receipt. "Mr. Thompson," she said, voice quieter than before, "your withdrawal is ready." For a moment, he didn't move. His tired eyes studied her as if trying to understand whether this was real or some cruel trick. Then slowly, his trembling fingers reached out and took the slip of paper. Caroline stood near the door watching. She saw the way his shoulders straightened, the way his grip tightened around the receipt, like it was something far greater than just a transaction. It was dignity, it was respect, it was something he should have never been denied in the first place. The old man stared at the receipt in his hands, his fingers tightening around the thin slip of paper, like it might disappear if he let go. For a long moment, he didn't speak. His lips parted slightly, but no words came. He just sat, their shoulders still hunched, eyes flickering between Rebecca and the numbers printed on the page. Then slowly, he inhaled a deep, trembling breath that seemed to pull him back to himself. His cane scraped against the pavement as he pushed himself upright, the weight of exhaustion still evident in his every movement. His eyes, glassy with emotion, met Rebecca's. "Thank you," he said, voice raw but steady. Rebecca looked like she wanted to say something, an apology, an explanation, anything to ease the weight of what had just happened, but no words would be enough, so she simply nodded. Caroline stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on the veteran's arm. "Let's go inside," she said. "Let's get what you need." He swallowed hard and nodded once as he took his first step toward the bank. The weight on his shoulders seemed just a little lighter, and for the first time that day, he walked not as a man begging for what was his, but as someone who had been seen, respected. Behind him, a few bystanders murmured some nodding and quiet approval. A young Man clapped softly. A woman with a stroller wiped at her eyes, and as Karoline walked beside him through the glass doors, she knew this wasn't just about one man's bank account. It was about dignity, about respect, about reminding people, especially those in power, that behind every policy, every rule, and every screen there was a human being, and that would always matter more. Like this video and subscribe this channel. Thank you.